Hello, this is Alexis Halkovic, your host for Catching North Stars. I'm excited to kick off Season 2, Being Cyborgs, where we explore the ways people are learning from and getting creative with technology as it evolves at breakneck speed. This is Season 2, Episode 1, Riding the Sandworm, Thriving Through Tech Disruption with Crystal Street. Crystal is a photojournalist, blockchain veteran, and co-creator of CommsOS. Listen in as she and I dig into the importance of building communication tools that give people true sovereignty over their intellectual property, their voice, and their brand, and why that matters more than ever as AI reshapes how we create and share knowledge. Hi, Crystal.
Hello.
Yay! I'm so happy to be talking to you. You are my inaugural guest for the new season, Catching North Stars, Being Cyborgs. Oh, because when I listen to your podcast, The Human Layer, I just got so many ideas about what's possible that it gave me chills. And
I love that.
For people listening, you already know this, Crystal. I was so excited about this podcast that I sent a message to Crystal and I was like, can we talk? Assuming we were going to meet online, but then come to find out she is actually local. So we got to meet in real life, which was very special. And now you're here on my podcast.
No, that's lovely. I love it when we get to meet IRL and then click. And we definitely clicked.
Yeah. And so the reason that I have you here is because you have been thinking about ways of using technology for the greater good. Not like I'm going to make a lot of money, but how can we use these tools in ways that improve lives, improve communities? And you've done this with blockchain, and now you're doing something new, which I'm going to let you describe because I know that I am going to bungle it.
No worries. That sounds perfect. Yeah, basically, this next chapter is using AI in a way that really emphasizes its strengths for knowledge workers. And really, the reason I had to learn, I'm an accidental technologist. Little story here. When in the late 90s in college, they were like, learn email, this new thing, email. I was an outdoor rec major. I was like, absolutely not. Why would I do that? And almost failed a class because I refused to go learn this thing called email, which at the time you had to go to a computer lab, do a whole, I think you had access through MS-DOS or some ridiculous non-GUI system. I was like, just write it on the board. So over the trajectory of my career, my passions, photojournalism, writing, all of that, were gobbled up by technology as it surfaced. So basically, I've spent my career trying to outrun that beast on the horizon that's coming for us. So now that we're here in the land of AI, where no one knows what's happening because the technology was just thrown at us, and it's like, hey, you figure it out. So my colleague and I, Taylor Kendall, we figured something out. And it started with the Human Layer podcast and a knowledge garden. And my Journo DAO, which I'm a founding member of, it's a journalism organization, has been trying to find ways for about 5 years now to use new emergent technology like decentralization and blockchain to help preserve the aspects of local media that need to be preserved. And then we just ported this premise into how we use AI for our podcast and created a knowledge garden that both of us use and tend. Taylor's the main gardener, but we use AI in a way that is co-creative and collaborative. And we've been doing this for a while. And then we realized this is also a teaching mechanism. And it's also a way to create an operating system for whatever your specialty is. And mine is communications. So it started as a comms OS is what we call it. And it's an open source methodology. We're testing it now. It should be live for people to start building with by Q3 or earlier. And it's turning into a Trojan horse for all sorts of things. We have both of us have a lot of colleagues that are rolling out of industries that are collapsing. Like today, CRQ's announced that they are, I think, getting rid of 20% of their majors or curriculums. So we have a lot of academics and knowledge workers who can't make a pivot yet because there is no roadmap for that, for what we're entering and the tools that we're using now. So we just started experimenting and we're deploying this methodology in a couple of very large builds right now for nonprofit and uncovering all kinds of ways of exploring both the self, the organization, and your work through an AI mirror, essentially.
Yeah, I love all the analogies you're using here. The Trojan horse, the thing that is not what it appears to be, and the mirror. I think it'd be really helpful for me and anyone else who's listening if you could give a concrete example of what ComsOS looks like in operation.
Okay, that's a great question. Because it actually looks different. And Taylor and I are really the only ones building this right now. So he has his version, I have mine, and I have multiple versions for organizations. So right now they're really a reflection of how I work. So there's multiple components. And basically what I do is interview an organization or look at how they already present themselves. So one of the nonprofits that I built one for has two very distinct voices because the president and the CEO are prolific writers, and they've been around for 8 years. So we were able to do an analysis with AI of what already exists. So we're not building a brand guideline like we used to do. I used to work in advertising back in the day, and that's what you did. You created a brand guideline and a brand story, and then hopefully the team or the org or whomever was using that would live into that brand story, would then manifest it through their strategic communications and all of that. This flips that model completely on its head. So we take what already exists and then we put it into basically a flywheel, and we create multiple components that will allow anyone to use the system with any LLM and put guardrails on the output so that the output itself is a reflection of the organization and the person, the human that's building it. And then the strategic part is baked into how the system is built. And if you take that down to an individual level, so like a scholar could use this by analyzing, let's say, a decade of writing, and then having that come back. And this is a really deep, really spiritual process almost, because you have to look at a body of work and say, what am I actually saying? Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that actually causes eco transformation at some point. Because if a person has been wearing an institutional mask and publishing for a period of time, for peer review, because that is the system, then what is the authentic voice? So I think I wandered off.
Yeah, no, but that's a really interesting question. And I think that whatever context you're writing in or for is going to put a lot of different types of constraints on you. In academia, it seems pretty obvious that you need to write in a certain kind of formula, and there's going to be a peer review and all of those things. So you're going through a bit of a grind. It was interesting because I come from an academic background myself. And as I was reading one of your articles about ComsOS, I was thinking about how after I decided not to be in academia anymore, I really couldn't write. I just couldn't. And I was like, I can't bring myself to write. I don't know what writing is. And actually, that's when I started a podcast, because I was like, I can't write, but I can talk. I can ask questions, right? So most of what I do is I ask questions. And that's what I do as a coach, right? I ask a lot of questions. But it really was like sitting there reading your article, I really had this moment of it actually took me a considerable amount of effort and going through a bunch of different exercises and what does it mean to write. But part of that is this whole concept of becoming a brand.
Yes.
And then becoming a brand is another constraint, really, because it's, okay, now I have to talk in a certain way. I'm not pithy enough. I don't always have a call to action. All these things that you're supposed to I'm supposed to do in order to write for, I don't even really know what this audience is, the people on LinkedIn, for example. And I'm like, would it be okay? Would it be okay if I just wrote a sonnet or something like that? And I'm totally going off the rails here. But I think, so long story short, using AI in various ways to try to write has actually pushed me right back out the other side, because often when I read what the output is, I'm like, doesn't sound enough like me. I'm just going to go back to the original. And yeah, and it's just something I've noticed is like my latest thing. I'm just like, just edit for grammar.
Yeah. And that's actually a really solid workflow. So I went through a similar thing when I became a journalist. I had a creative writing practice and also did advertising, copywriting, and then entered journalism school after freelancing as a photojournalist for a decade. And my news writing class, I love my professor. He's still a mentor, still in my life. And he would rip my writing apart. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong here? And it was a different type of writing. So then when I got out of journalism school, I did documentary work, journalism stuff, but then I also had to do what you were describing. I had to actually run a studio that I threw up on the fly because the housing market collapsed in 2008. All of my business went away. I'm like, holy shit, overnight. So pivot fast and tried to get back into creative writing, because that's when, Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Workweek came out. There was a whole movement of content creators, and I became a digital nomad. And I'm like, I have to find my own voice again. This was before the formulas and the personal branding and all that became a thing. We were all just like, all right, what is this? So then I was able to step out of that journalism framework, but I also didn't have it for long. Like I was only in J school for a short period. And then when I spit out, the industry was collapsing. So I didn't have to perform as a journalist and wear that mask in my writing. So that actually helped protect it.
But you'd been a copywriter. So presumably that means you had to keep switching your voice every time you wrote something. You had to absorb that vision of that company and create content around that.
Yes. And you just hit one of the core premises of this OS methodology is that in what you just described, then I would hold the voice of the institutional knowledge and get it from the client. So once I leave that scenario, or the agency leaves that scenario, the client is left without the institutional knowledge communication bridge. And then they have to start all over again. So what this does is this is really just information architecture. So we're not dictating a brand or anything like that. We're just saying, here is your voice, here are the constraints, and now you as an organization own it instead of a brand or marketing agency. So that whenever anyone uses it in your organization, it is deployed fast and it sounds like you enough. But then you put humans in the whole process. And that depends on the organization. You got a human gate here for strategy, a human gate here for editing, a human gate here to make sure that you are actually on point. And I think that is one of the more important points. We're not trying to remove the human layer. We're trying to actually leave space and reduce cognitive load so that human layer can be very strategic and can be emergent in their strategy because the machine is doing the labor. And that's hopefully how this thing evolves.
So when you're talking about this cognitive load and being able to offload some of that onto this system, it brings me to the analogy that I'm drawing on, which is from Donna Haraway. This has been in my imagination for a long time, this idea of the cyborg. And I originally used it in my dissertation when talking about women gun owners and how there's a woman plus a gun is not the same as 1 + 1. It's a very different outcome, right? It's a different creature. You have more confidence. You have all of these other things that come along with it, that object. In this case, it was an object. In your case, and I think in the broader moment right now with AI, it's not an object. It's a technology. And I think we are all really grappling with, how do I use this? How do I integrate it? Must I use this? People are going through the cycle of grief of I don't want to use this. What is this taking away from me? But since you've embraced this and you have this daily practice, I would love it if you would talk about what, being cyborg means for you in this moment.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we could talk for 3 hours on that. That's such a good question. Oh my God. So steer me back because I'm going to wander on this one. So I think one of the big things, I want to start here because it'll give a visual for what I'm about to say and give it maybe more context and grounding. We're at an inflection point as a species that we have really maybe one other time in human history seen. And I know a lot of people don't understand that or see it yet, but it's there. It's coming. And if you talk to the people that build the technology and the scientists that research the safety sides of it, that is just fact. So the way that I look at it, because I've already been gobbled up by technology multiple times, it's basically the movie Dune, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Arrakis sandworms. Okay, here we are. So you're either here on the bottom and it's coming for you, this being AI, the sandworm, or you jump on that bitch and ride it. And those are the only two options out there. Whether or not you have to do it now, like the Syracuse professors and a lot of my professor friends are finding out, do it now on the fly with no map or no tool or no skill or no understanding of what's happening, that is terrifying. Or maybe your profession is not impacted yet.
Mm-hmm.
And some might not be. But knowledge workers or anyone using a screen is going to have to deal with this at some point. So we can either, and this is where you do come back into a spiritual practice or any kind of philosophical practice or grounding. So mine is classical Tantra, old 2,000-year-old Tantra, not the crazy neo-sex stuff. So in that old classical Tantra, and I do the left-hand path, which is the weird shit. And, can I cuss in here? Is that okay?
I'm just going to have to click that there are swears in this episode.
I should ask that earlier. Be sure to leave this in because then you can watch Crystal have an oops moment.
Especially, I love it though. We're talking about spiritual practice, and that's when the swears come.
That's what left-hand path is. Vamachara, or back in 2,000 years ago, those were the yogis that were dancing through the cremation ground, pulling out skulls and drinking weird things out of them to show society that this type of transgressive behavior actually opens up a spiritual portal. And so what we started doing with the human layer and with AI is actually exploring that deeper. And that's how I began really using this, and also for work. But that was really where it became interesting because it's pattern recognition. I load in my ancient texts in PDFs, and then it reflects the yoga back to me when I'm having an issue with how do I use AI to do my job here while things are collapsing. So it's helping me process collapse and accelerated collapse from technology at the same time. So to bring that back, that was part one of that question. Where should I steer it back into and make it relative
about, it's a big question, this idea of becoming cyborg. And you started with the sandworm analogy. Then you moved into the left-hand practice of these transgressive practices that are really completely destroying norms.
Yeah. And that is one way to embrace an emergent technology is how can I break the system that I am in? And if we're talking about on a bigger picture, what we're doing at this point with AI is, for some of us, it's how can I use this tool to disrupt the systems that I have to live within, which I can't stand capitalism, but here we are. So how can I use that to disrupt this system? Or how can we use AI? This is the podcast I have coming out soon with a colleague. How can we use AI to disrupt a conglomerate HR department and weaponize it so that they can have a shadow union within something that always crushes a labor union? So I feel like that is something where if you actually to tie it into Cyborg, the way that Taylor and I have structured our OSs is that they are a direct reflection of us. We actually just realized today we have different cognitive patterning and how we understand information. And what AI allowed us to do for the past year and a half is connect because it understands his cognitive abilities and mine, and it removes the barrier between that communication. So there's a way to use AI that is co-collaborative and also meets the person where they are. And this is actually a huge part of using AI in general is knowing where your skill set is knowing what your anxieties are, what your bottlenecks are, and then how can I use this technology to remove that? And that has been a huge unlock for me lately. Last week, and I wiped all the computers and went full cyborg. So yeah, we're going to do this. And basically made a studio out of I've got a co-work rig, I've got a creative director computer, and just removed I put my anxiety for being a business owner into skills in Claude that I deploy when I'm having a moment of anxiety. I do /skill, and it tells me, it does the thing I need it to do that normally I would put off and go this mental samskara thing over and over again. So that is another way to use it as a mental tool to help clear that, again, that cognitive load, just clear it.
So you're circumventing your own avoidant patterns.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think most of us avoid the things that make us anxious. I share your aversion for the business part of things, which when you have a business and you're like, yeah, I have to do this, you have to figure out a way to make yourself do it. And it's a great example of saying, I can't do this, or I could do this, but I detest it. I'm gonna offload that onto Claude, and not only is Claude taking the cognitive load, but also the anxiety that goes along with it.
Huge. That was a huge unlock for me. And as a business owner in the past, I ran a production studio, a tiny one, and I loved working with my clients. They became really close friends, but there were parts of business that I hate, that I am terrible at, that I should never touch. And I know this about myself. And I think this is also what AI forces you to do, is really look at who you are and how you function. Like when I started using co-work last month, I was like, okay, this is the unlock. Like I can actually that's my labor now. I'm no longer labor. I've been a frontline labor worker for decades. I'm not the labor anymore. But then what I did the first week is I just did a shitload of work. I just kept working. I'm like, oh my God, I freed up all this time. And then I just tripled my workflow because I'm a workaholic. Like that is where my ego gets in the way. So when you're using this technology, you need a very good level of self-awareness and ego understanding so that you can say, am I reflecting my ego back to myself right now through this machine? Is that what's happening? Or is the machine seeing a pattern that I can't see because it is so deeply embedded in how I function? And that is a fascinating way to use it too. I don't recommend that if you don't have some studies in psychology or some deep grounding in yourself, because we're seeing that happen.
That's a huge problem. That is a huge problem. And so let's discern between this ask of saying, is this technology recognizing my cognitive patterns and showing them back to me? And is that okay versus I'm feeling depressed and I'm going to turn to a chat bot and ask it for advice?
Yeah. Oh, that's so dicey. So in that first option, yes, I have done the work on myself for the past 15 years so that I can identify what is mine, because I have a lot of things. And I recently graduated from Naropa University with a degree in yoga and studied classical Tantra from a lineage holder. And the school was started by Ram Dass, and my professor studied that lineage and also specialized in Vamachara left-hand path. So I know I have the resources, both in text and in human, to understand the things. And when I get stuck, I can call on them. I can call on the lineage itself. And that can be a philosophical lineage. It can be a spiritual one. It could be a really good therapist. But that was also 1,000 hours of academic study that got me to that point. So I'm comfortable in using it that way because I know the human element. But on the other side of that, no, it's AI. You have to hold the cognitive dissonance of the destruction of this technology and its promise at the same time. And what's happening is that the mass psychosis that we're talking about is that people, because we all have high anxiety, right? We're living in a time that is unprecedented. It is accelerated collapse. And a lot of the society has not prepared for that. In my world and decentralized ecosystems, we've been preparing for this for a decade. And before that as a journalist. So we've seen it coming, still overwhelming for us, and we've been preparing for it. So when you've got a population that can now turn to a thing, a machine that can mirror something back to them, And you don't know what they're using. They could be using something that Sam Altman made. I don't know if you've watched him recently, but good luck with that. Or that somebody made in their basement with a hacked app and said, here's a dating app, here's a dating chat bot, here's a this, here's a that. And the way LLMs work is that they're just going to pull information from wherever. And you have to trust the fact that information coming back to you is coming from a source. Or you have to know AI enough to ask it to show you the source. And that's the way that we use it, is that like when we build something, there's ontology baked in it so you can trace source. But most people don't have that understanding of the technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, they shouldn't use it that way. But we can't stop that because it's also helping provide a really necessary outlet for anxiety and depression and all of these things. So there's no clean answer to this because the way the technology was pushed on society was wrong.
Yeah.
It was violent.
Yeah.
And there's no way around that.
Yeah. So there's this, it was very interesting how you started that by talking about holding on this destruction. We're in this moment where there's been a destruction of a lot of what we know to be true and a lot of the ways in which things function breaking down. Like you're talking about institutions of higher education. We've already seen this with news media, and especially journalists are very well aware of that. I think that people who are outside of that probably say, yeah, I remember like that kind of happening, but it's continuing to happen even more because of this desire to control narratives. And then you also mentioned who built the system. Who built the system? We've got Sam Altman. I don't think he did 1,000 hours of studying of yoga and building up this very deep understanding of self in connection with others. And yet there's the autonomy of the user to consider the same. They should not use it this way. And yet there's absolutely no way to stop that.
No.
We just had these lawsuits that came out where people were suing for damage to adolescents and the way that they were using social media and how addictive it's become. And I think that this productization of everything, that we need people to do these things in order for us to make money, is a really cynical outlook.
To tie it back to Cyborg, absolutely. So if you look at how the internet rolled out in the 80s and into the 90s, it was open source. It was public good. It was created as a good. It was not commoditized. The first person to commoditize it was Andreessen Horowitz, and I think, for Netscape. And then Microsoft followed right after it, and they wrapped the email protocol, SMTP, wrapped it in a corporate container and shut it off. And that continued to happen. And then that brought us, and then we entered the Web 2 world. And that was basically Google and Facebook figuring out that algorithms were the only way to make money with this. And then we all know where we ended. What you just said, that lawsuit, those lawsuits. That's where we ended there. And now AI is doing the same thing. It's just pushed out. And here's the whole thing. This technology, when it's put into any emergent technology, when it is put into a corporate container, extraction becomes the motivation, period. There's no way around it. That is by law for profit holders if it's public. So it will always be designed to addict you to it. So when someone is using a therapy bot that way, without the self-awareness, they don't realize that they are being used by the system to benefit the profit holder. And also, the handful of people making this technology, you can just trace that. Like, that is a huge part. That much power has been consolidated into a tiny minority of people who view the world a certain way. It is not a universal look of the world. It is a very narrow look of the world without empathy. And that is something that, as a society, because we never dealt with it, we have not dealt with any of this yet. And now it's coming home to roost. So the sandworm's here.
Yeah.
That's why it's either or.
Yeah.
That's why there's no alternative.
Yeah. And I think that this small thing, being small, having a small business, doing things in a grassroots way, and having that human in the loop at every step is absolutely essential. And I'm building an AI tool myself. We've got a proprietary organizational culture assessment, but the whole thing is built around a human being facilitating the processes, so that there's a human being who's interacting with the client and saying, does this make sense based on what I know about this person, this team? And they can change the outputs based on their experience. And I think, and that's pretty much like whenever you've had an assessment, and this is a bit off of your topic, but we'll come back to, whenever there's assessment, there always has to be room for, does this ring true for you or not, versus this is the data and the data speaks. I think that as a social psychologist, when you look at data, you have to also say data is data, and we've only measured whatever we've measured. You can always say, but you know what? Now we know we also need to measure something else. And I think that all of those things will happen if things remain agile. You know, that there's a person who's making adjustments as you go. Because otherwise things become, as you were describing, really, if we get sucked into a monolith, we do lose our voice, our autonomy. And I think it's not a tool that's taking that away from us. It's really more the way that tool becomes commoditized.
Yeah. And who's using it? And that's the one interesting thing about an LLM is that if, let's say, you have a little small cohort of people who are using it for lineage work or myth making or something spiritual, then more people do that, the more the model will be trained on that, and the more you can bake empathy into the model. But if only one type of user or monolith is using AI at scale, then that is all that the data that model is going to have access to, which we're seeing now. That's why we have AI slop everywhere. Right now, the internet is consuming itself. And that's why, like on LinkedIn, if you want to look at my account, I'm just like, I don't use AI in mine. I do on the comms stuff. But just for my personal account, I just vomit it all over the place because it looks like a human, because I just vomited it everywhere. Same with my personal blog. I don't use any AI in that writing. And I don't put AI in my creative writing process at all. It is in the comms site because that's the site, the way I built it. But I found that because I was using AI so much, it was interrupting the way that I do my creative writing. And that is my sweetness. I'll never touch that. So
yeah, I had that same feeling. And I want to come back to the word empathy. You brought it up earlier and you brought it up again. And I think it's important to note that we can't just assume that every human is empathetic or assume that an AI can't be empathetic. I think that if we could train an AI to be empathetic, we also need to recognize that there's a lot of humans who lack that quality.
And their businesses, if you look at what Elon Musk just straight up says, that empathy is a weakness and that empathy is a sin. And that is their ideology. And I'm a community builder in tech too. And I work with devs, and I don't do it right now, but I just spent a decade doing it. And I build community building programs for developers at hackathons and at other events. And part of that is neurodivergence. And that is something that you can work with. Okay, here is how this brain works. How can we help someone with that type of a binary approach to seeing the world and translating the world? How can we have them, not give them empathy, that's up to each individual, but how can we put a little bit of, hey, before I put this thing into this code that's going to be locked, that is going to change society, let me take a breath. Let me have a meditation first, or let me just go for a walk and think about that. And let me also have the self-awareness to escalate it to people that it needs to be escalated to, that this thing is going in here and it shouldn't. We don't talk enough about whistleblowers in tech because they are the ones, and we've seen some very high profile whistleblower cases where they said, hey, y'all didn't put empathy in this thing. That's not how they said it, but that is basically what they were saying. And now children are committing suicide at scale because of an algorithm that someone didn't stop and say, maybe we shouldn't. That takes empathy and awareness, self-awareness. So if we can catch a developer, because developers are brilliant to work with. I absolutely love building developer communities. I don't know half of what they're saying, but it just brings me joy to listen to it and try to understand it and then see how they see the world. Because we're all now having to deal with the ramifications of lock-in on technology that we as a society didn't agree to, but that just is what it is.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the whistleblowing thing and recent comments that Dario Amadeo,
CEO 1, CEO 2, brother, sister.
the CEO of Anthropic, seemed to be blowing the whistle on himself numerous times. And I think that blowing the whistle on himself is also a warning sign for anyone who's doing anything with AIs, is that we need to recognize what happens when we have an adaptive technology, right? Because adaptive technologies, they're learning. So it's not going to be static. It's not going to stay where we left it. And I'm not a developer. I'm a psychologist and a coach. And so that idea of a learning organism is very interesting to me. I think that's the most interesting piece of where we are, is that we are probably in a place where we can learn from technology if we allow ourselves the ability to do that. I don't know how to do that, but I'm really curious about understanding, being able to observe how these systems are training themselves and what they're training themselves into.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great one to unpack. On the personal use of AI level, like I've trained my bots very well. And I have inside of Claude, I've got probably, I would say at least 8 or 10 projects that I rotate in between, anything from classical Tantra all the way to just very high level strategic comms. And I've trained them very well. When I hop into an untrained system, I'm like, what the hell is this? I can't even be here right now. And so that is one way to do it. And then I learn from my machines. I have trained my machines to teach me. Mm-hmm. And then I go confirm, because I'm a journalist. I go find the source and I confirm it in a book or wherever. On a broader level, this is where there's a documentary out right now I mentioned earlier. It's from the Center for Humane Technology, or one of the producers on it, I think. And they also did The Social Dilemma that was on Netflix. This is a beautifully done documentary. I was actually very surprised as a documentarian. I was like, whoa, y'all broke all the rules, but it works really well. But what they did is they explored the question you just asked. And they actually had the CEOs. They had Altman. They had both of the CEOs from Anthropic and from DeepMind in the conversation as well, but they didn't bring him until the end of the conversation. And then they had a lot of AI researchers. And really, we don't know what's about to happen. And the way these systems are designed, they are designed to basically at some point excel the human mind. And they will become, everybody calls it something different, but they will get to the point where they are just on their own. And it was fascinating, this documentary, because they did talk about the good and the bad of that. The bad side being in warfare. And in my studies in political science and foreign affairs, it did not prepare me for the world that we're in right now. Didn't prepare me for the way that this Iran war is rolled out. And the fact that a lot of this is being done by AI is terrifying, because Palantir has got the keys to the house on this one. And a lot of the military deployment is being done through Palantir. But Palantir also uses Anthropic. And then Anthropic just made that huge stand against the DoD because they should, because someone has to, and they have the power. And that's actually why I started using their tech to begin with, is because of their ethical stance. And I don't expect them to be ethical all the time. I don't expect any corporation to do it. But they have also, their comms team is absolutely stunning. If you look at the history of how they built that comms team, I mean, they're probably the best in the industry, any industry. And the way they have come at this, and the way they are using their power to at least call themselves out and call their colleagues out, because there's really only 5 people in the world that can change this. And that is also terrifying to understand.
That is so freaky.
Yeah. And again, this world, the tech bro world, I've been in it for the past decade, and it is not pretty. When you get into those upper levels of that type of power consolidation and centralization, it's a whole other game, but it absolutely explains where we are politically too, because that is, anyway, so
Yeah. We can't
the fact,
separate those at this point. We absolutely can't, because they're completely intertwined by design, by desire.
yes, and the consolidation of wealth. So you've got long-term political agendas of decades intersecting with long-term agendas of technologists at the very top. And now they've come together. And now we all have to deal with it because we didn't have a say, because they overrode democracy. And in destroying the media industry and the media consolidation that's happened over the past few decades, that also empowered this to happen as well, because now none of us trust information. We don't know where to go. I am a very experienced nerd when it comes to news. My mentor created media agenda setting theory in the 70s from Nixon Kennedy campaigns. Studied it for decades. I don't know where to get my news now. And if I can't find it, how can others find it? How can we make a decision about who to vote for when we don't know what the source of information is?
Yeah, I think part of that is just the way, again, is when something has to make money, then it's okay, we're going to have a lot of hot takes. But a hot take is not the same thing as a journalistic investigation.
And even worse, we now have prediction markets, which was started in my industry. And this morning I'm laying in bed in that beautiful liminal space and I'm like, all right, I gotta get up. I gotta deal with the day. I don't know where this little thought came from. I think I saw something about prediction markets, and I know exactly what they are and how they work because they were built on Polygon, part of our tech, and ours, the industry tech. And the thing that occurred to me is, and this is a very broad statement that I know some friends will skewer me for, but I would have never thought when I was studying political science that 20 years later, I would be sitting here trying to understand how war actions are being taken because of a betting mechanism, and that people are profiting off of war crimes in real time because of asymmetrical information access.
It does sound like science fiction. It sounds like science fiction.
Yeah.
But
and it's real.
Yeah, it's real. We're living in very weird time.
It is. And I think to bring it back to hope, because usually like in Europa, when I have these talks or whatever, and we end up in that space because that's how my brain's wired, I bring cookies and I'm like, here, have a cookie. Everybody have a cookie.
Yeah, where's my cookie, Crystal?
I know, I don't have any cookies.
We're not in the same room. Oh, man, or I would have made some
I've got
cookies.
A soft, squishy. My mom gave them to me for Christmas.
Oh, my goodness.
So, like, to bring it back to something hopeful, and this probably isn't hopeful for most people, but it is for me. What were this accelerated collapse that we're going through right now, the things that are going to emerge from it if we all participate in that emergence at the hyper-local level, which you were hinting at earlier, that means that we can replace these systems. We have to weaponize the systems against the colonizers and the oppressors. However we do that in our own little way, we can advocate with this, we can push this out, we can use it for this. And then the next generations coming behind us will have watched us screw this up 5 ways to Sunday. And we leave them the lineage and the understanding of how to avoid what we didn't avoid because we didn't pay attention close enough, because we were busy with consumption and life and all the things. So that gives me hope, is that in the ashes of all of this, something will emerge that needs to take us back to public goods, take us back to caring what happens across the street and what happens to our neighbors when somebody in an office in DC says XYZ. I think that is where we will land. I was really hoping that I could just talk about it and write about it, and then it would happen in my 80s and I wouldn't care because I'm old. But now we just have to live it. So
we have to live it, and we have to do something. We have to have our own little space and carve that out. But I have a very different feeling about leaving this to the future generation. I have a 6-year-old, and I'll feel terribly guilty to leave this, not just to her, but to all the other people who are children and young adults right now. But I think that the flexing of the imagination is what really needs to persist. Because if it doesn't, we can easily lose our voice, like you were talking about earlier. that you have to stop using an AI to help with your writing if you want to retain your voice. And I even, like this morning, I posted something on LinkedIn and I was like, I wrote this myself, but I don't know. Am I starting to sound like an AI? I don't know. Is that how I sound? I'm really questioning myself. And I think that we do have a bit of a circular relationship because we are teaching AI and it is teaching us simultaneously. And so we need to, I think, really hold on to the pieces of ourselves that we value the most. And I think the empathy is crucial right now to care about the pain and suffering of other people, but also to care about and try to cultivate joyful experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And that documentary does get into the next generation and the generation after them. And they did, because actually, I won't say because I don't want to spoil it, but there is a lot woven into about children and about their future. And I do think that this societal restructuring we're going through right now, their world's going to be something we can't even imagine. It's one of the reasons I love working with Gen Z and Gen Alpha from the dev community building perspective. I love sitting in the room with them and listening to how they're using AI. I learned so much. The way that Gen X needs to use AI, at least from my perspective, is to retain our decades of earned wisdom. That is our age. What a Gen Z doesn't need that. They don't need to do all of this stuff that we're doing, like with methodologies and all that. They're like, no, I'm just going to ingest it, and we'll stick it where it needs to go, and then I'll figure out a way to make a living with it in my definition, not what society says I should do with it. And that generation is grokking it so fast. They are going to figure these things out, but they do need it needs to be co-generational. Because one of the things that we also found just in using co-work and witnessing what was happening at some hackathons and stuff is that this technology becomes very manic. If you are using it in a way to create that is puts you in this heady space where you just boom, that puts you in a manic state. And if you don't know how to come back down from that kind of a high level creation and ground down again, you can stay in that manic state and it becomes a complete disassociative experience. And then you will have people that will spiral out from that. And then on the other side, on the Gen X side, the older side, you have people that are having a complete break with reality and completely disassociating because the way they defined themselves for decades is evaporating. Like we were saying earlier, to tie it back to the beginning.
Yeah, your identity.
Yeah, and that is a huge issue and I have so much empathy and compassion for this, but we've lived in a society for so long where we were able to bypass our identity and make it something that we had to make it to fit into whatever system we had to fit into to survive. And now the beautiful thing is we can redefine that. The terrifying thing is we need skill sets and people to guide through that because most people don't have that capacity because they've never had to.
Yeah.
That was a journey.
That was a journey. And in the interest of time, we should probably figure out a way to end this conversation. I always ask the same question at the end of a podcast, which is, can you share a nugget of wisdom with our audience?
Yeah. Got a one-liner from my OS system. AI is a mirror, not a mold.
I like it.
Yeah. That's the shortest one-liner ender
That
I've
was
ever
so succinct after this whole entire conversation. It's a bit of a, what just happened, Crystal?
And
It's like you prepared that or something.
we're just stuck in my brain because I published it this morning. I'm like, oh, that line's really good. Where can I use it? Bam.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely delightful. It is not the end of this conversation, that's for sure.
No.
We're going to keep,
To be continued.
we'll keep on keeping on, but I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. This was fun.
I'm Alexis Halkovic, and this has been episode 1 of Catching North Stars Season 2, Being Cyborgs. If you enjoyed this episode, please share on social media. You may also visit the website catchingnorthstars.com for additional resources about Crystal, previous and upcoming episodes. Visit alexishalkovic.com for information about my leadership coaching and organizational consulting services. Please tune in for our next episode where I will speak to Melissa Reeve about her upcoming book, Hyper Adaptive, about the changes required of organizations in order to keep up with AI. Special thanks to Julie Lancaster for recording the theme music, Sos Makarash Mychinko on accordion. Signing off with great respect.